what is today's advice?
Well, today I have a few topics to cover. The main theme is introductions and small talk. We'll talk about introducing yourself with something I call the elevator pitch introduction. Then we'll also get into how to continue conversations with something called the AAA or AAA technique. And finally, we'll talk about some acceptable topics and topics to avoid when having small talk. So I think that brings us to the final part about acceptable topics and topics you should be careful about and topics to generally avoid when getting into small talk. So do you have some ideas of acceptable topics?
Acceptable topic. I think where you're from is okay. Talk about like hobbies, something like that.
Yeah, I would say both of those are acceptable topics. On top of that, of course, I think every culture is comfortable with talking about the weather and events such as sports, for example. And if you're at an event or something like that, you can talk about the event that you're attending. And of course, the place or city that you're at. And if you know the person somewhat well, you can mostly talk about personal news, although there are some topics you need to be careful about, but something new in your life, such as, hey, I got a promotion, or something you feel comfortable sharing with, those are acceptable too. Now, one topic I would say to be careful about, it's not necessarily one you should avoid, but something to be careful about is talking about family. If you want to talk about family yourself, about your family, that's perfectly fine. It's more about asking questions about the other person's family that you may need to be careful about.
Why is this bit sensitive about family?
Yeah, that's a good question. The reason being is because not everyone is uncomfortable with family, but some people might consider it too personal. Depending on their situation, they may not want to talk about their partners. And when I'm thinking about family, I'm also thinking about things like marital status and children, particularly. So, talking about someone, are you married, especially if they're a woman, is uncomfortable. And then specifically talking about children. In some cultures, it might be not so comfortable to ask about that. For example, do you have any children? And if they say no, well, why not? That's too personal for obvious reasons. So it's best to avoid that. Of course, if the other person is fine with talking about it, then that's perfectly fine, which is why I say be careful, get a sense of what they're comfortable with. If you want to share about your own family, that's perfectly fine, of course. And here are some topics to avoid. Politics, I would say, you want to be careful, especially if it's politics about the other person's country. Religion, race or ethnicity, age, and appearance, the person's appearance, their body shape, body type, and talking about money or asking about the person's salary, how much money they make. Those are some topics to really should avoid. Of course, some people are quite happy to talk about a few of those things, but it's best to stay away from them if you're not sure. I would also add about one other thing that's particularly you need to be careful about, especially in modern times, is about gender and gender-related questions specifically. Because I think in many countries, I think also Japan as well, gender identity, it's a very sensitive topic right now. You may have seen, for example, in Zoom meetings, LinkedIn profiles, and that many people will have preferred pronouns about what they prefer to be referred as, such as he, him, or she, her, or even they and them. So it's best not to make assumptions based on the person's appearance or ask questions. Are you a man? Are you a woman? That's something that's really very sensitive, and you should avoid asking those kinds of questions. So generally, as we said, things that are acceptable, weather, sports, hobbies, somewhat careful around family, and be very careful about politics and religion, gender, race, and asking questions about how much money a person makes, of course. Any other questions or comments or thoughts, Moriuchi-san?
As I said at the beginning, I'm not native English speaker, so sometimes I hesitate to talk. But today you introduce us AAA technique. So
yes,
having conversation with AAA technique is really fun. And lastly, you gave us some example, acceptable or avoid topics. So combination of this AAA and acceptable or avoid topics technique is going to be really interesting to have a practice or conversation with people.
Yes. And I think those kinds of topics and techniques will really help to make your conversation skills much stronger, and it will make it easier to make connections and network with people and just have good personal relations as well, because you can use them in casual situations as well as business situations.
John-san, thank you very much for your time today.
Yes, and thank you again for having me. Looking forward to coming back on again and giving more information and more techniques related to business English.